Resident Evil games used to be bad. Cringe, even. It is quite hard to properly explain the amount of anger that was emanating from the community towards Capcom during this time. In the 5 years before Resident Evil 7 released in 2017, the general fan base had thought that the series was on life support. Operation Raccoon City was a urinal cake of a game. Resident Evil 6 was nothing anyone wanted. Revelations 2 was mid, and Umbrella Corps was a shit stain on the otherwise yellowing pillow of the series. Fortunately, Resident Evil games today are good again. The ebb and flow of time has thus allowed us to see how a media series can go from first class to third class, back to world class again. Amazing. New, third-generation Resident Evil games are worth one's time, full stop. In Resident Evil 7, the player assumes control of white bread spokesperson Ethan Winters as he ventures forth into a Louisiana ranch inhabited by residents who are evil, all in an attempt to rescue his girlfriend, Mia, who had previously been thought to be dead after an extended disappearance. He starts by rolling up to a lone ranch all by his lonesome, with nothing but an email and actually literally nothing else. What a dumbass. He actually finds Mia rather early in a dungeon, but not too soon after that Mia goes sicko mode with a chainsaw on his arm. Ethan is knocked out, and then the game really begins. Upon first seeing what the game looks like with the organic optical devices in your head, one could say, wow, this game looks pretty photorealistic. Redditors and other similar anti-intellectuals will be the first to tell you that graphics do not matter. Gameplay does, which is certainly true, but there are at times a crossover point in video occurs, where the vibe and visuals the game are trying to achieve requires there to be a certain degree of high infidelity. Gross out horror is a style, a trope that Resident Evil 7 is attempting to cover. 1970s and 80s slasher film kind of horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of violence. To get the best effect of that, the guts, gore, and other tidbits in the environment need to look as icky as possible so the player believes that the pot of indiscernible gloop is real. One needs to feel disgusted by the stab wounds, the grisly stabs, and the transfixing decapitations. What is slasher horror without gore? Not a good one. The most infamous, standout, best, whatever you wish to call it, moment in Resident Evil 7 is the dinner table scene. Ethan finally awakes at a dinner table in front of a tasty selection of ears and fingers. Sitting with him is the Baker family, the main antagonists of the game. They immediately begin to antagonize Ethan in a typical slasher movie fashion. Comical gore, comical violence, comical dialogue, but evil. It is also where we get the first proper introduction to one of the greatest survival horror villains, Jack Baker. A hulking brute of a villain, with a tragic backstory, of course. The sheer amount of glee that this character has in self-mutilation is something that must simply only exist to be a graphical showcase of the RE game engine. Every time this man is on screen, he is either trying to kill you with a doohickey, or he is finding some way to be dismembered in a horrific fashion, similar to my old pet hamster. In fact, anytime one of the main villains of the story are on screen, whether it be Marguerite Baker or Lucas Baker, Resident Evil 7 is a treat. Said near photorealism treads down the uncanny valley, meaning every close-up with these residents, who are evil, is terrifying, just how close yet so far they are from reality. Lucas Baker, in particular, has a certain slimy look to him, a nervous type of guy who certainly would be the type of individual who is good at computers and making awkward conversation, but not much else. Nonetheless, the amount of detail that the Bakers have making them human is what makes their monstrous activities all the more horrific to experience. They look like normal people, and still act like them in many ways. They smile, they have dinner, talk about family. It just so happens they also kidnap random strangers to eat them, or turn them into indiscernible and amorphous creatures called the Mold. No more zombies in a Resident Evil game. The Walking Dead ruined that vibe by Season 5. Each one of the characters one is introduced to here at the dinner table will become a boss later in the game, even the old lady in one form. Each of them each control an area that each creates a certain vibe, mood, and gameplay style the player must navigate. Jack controls the main house of the Baker Ranch, which carries the most similar vibe to original Resident Evil titles. A sprawling mansion, with Jack perusing the halls for your skin. A variety of unique puzzles with obtuse solutions. Hell yeah, this is Resident Evil. Marguerite has a house she wanders about in as well, but now there are environmental hazards of the buggy kind, so now one must use all manner of incendiary devices that the ATF would rather you not understand how to make. Her boss fight also has her transform into not an indiscernible mass monster like old Resident Evil bosses, but rather a curious bug lady that has a bug hive growing out of was once her lady bits. Crazy shit. I love this kind of horror as much as I do the psychological stuff within the likes of Silent Hill 2. The exploration is also considerably more intuitive than before, and by that, I mean one has better direction and guidance here, compared to wandering and pondering where the hell to go in the older RE games. In those titles, one is just led along by vague direction and intuition. In RE7, Ethan is told where to travel around the ranch by the somewhat mysterious Zoe Baker, who he appears to be the only sane member of the family left. She says that she and Mia are infected by the same disease that is causing the other Bakers to be so violent. She needs Ethan to collect some items, though. Weird items, like an arm, that can be used to save Mia. Having no other option, he then sets forth exploring the least bizarre southern estate in Louisiana. The dinner scene is also when one realizes that, by all immeasurable metrics, and by my subjectively objective opinion, that RE7 is the scariest Resident Evil title. Now, it is no stretch of the imagination to say that this was not a high bar to beat. Resident Evils, while certainly nerve-wracking on a terrifying level, were not jump-out-of-your-seat scary. Jump scares happened, spookiness happened, but for the most part the series was heavily focused on pondering the ethics and moralities of Jill sandwiches and heading towards the nearest bingo hall location to be scary. Cheesy Camp Horror was always the name of the game before the 7th game, and in fact, Cheesy Campy Horror is also present here amongst the aforementioned gross-out horror. Yet, no Resident Evil before had as much effort placed into perfectly timed jump scares, creaky floorboards, and mysterious sounds, an overburdening sense of dread amongst the bodies, alongside that peculiar little paranormal girl, Evelyn. Or is she even a ghost? Resident Evil has never seriously dabbled in the realm of the paranormal. Everything was explained with what amounted to cartoon cereal box mad science. Yet, when that little girl started to appear and disappear, I really thought Capcom finally went into the paranormal with Resident Evil. In fact, the ghosts that appear in the corner of the screen in the beginning hour demo made me hold the belief that even before the game came out, that the paranormal would be in the game. Playing the full release, though, revealed I was wrong about the paranormal aspect, but that does not stop the fact that RE7 is a scary game, with the express purpose of being frightening via its visuals, rather than the traditional survival horror trappings of resource management-based fear. That's not to say that RE7 lacks any traditional survival horror either. Certainly, the game would be considered rather balanced when it comes to resource management. Unlike Resident Evil 4, where shots are constantly being slung out, the 7th title returns to the gameplay style brought forth in the first 3 numbered titles. It is often better to avoid getting hit by what is in front of you than trying to hit what is in front of you. Unless, of course, you are like me and play survival horror games on easy. Then Resident Evil 7 really is just like Resident Evil 4, but with even tighter hallways and corridors. It should be said that I do not play horror games on easy because I find them hard, no. It's just I find the instant my survival instincts lag behind in any given moment, I am then perpetually annoyed at each subsequent rerun through an area, and all attempts at horror, which I am more interested in, is immediately dissipated. I am not a man who likes to waste time playing bad games, but I am also a man who wishes not to be miserable playing a game in a genre whose sole purpose is to craft a rather particular mood that can be immediately shattered at the first instance of a smooth-brained or butter-fingered movements. It should also be said horror games are the only ones I carry this attitude towards. I beat many of the Souls games, aside for the ones I hated, and my main favorite online game, as of this video, is the ever-difficult fighting game, Guilty Gear Strive. I do so enjoy difficulty and challenge, but only when I vibe from the said difficulty, for I otherwise play games that emanate unusual or unique emotions and or cohesive emotion direction. Resident Evil games do this latter part quite well when I am not being harassed by puzzles I cannot immediately understand. Shit just makes my controller fly into the air towards my now empty hamster's cage. Is my experience and enjoyment playing Resident Evil 7 and 8 nullified because I played them on easy? Unless you are a hater more skilled in the art than me, no, because all I wanted from these games was a spooky horror theme house ride like one visits during Halloween, and by God, I certainly got what I wanted from this horror experience, sans the survival aspect. For the most part. While Resident Evil 7 is excellent on the front of visual and auditory design, I find the game lacks in the critical department of main playable characters, for the main character, Ethan Winters, is about as plain as a blanket of snow. Resident Evil 7 is the first game in the series to take place entirely in first person, or at least the first good one to take place entirely in first person. While such a gameplay style does amp the visceral spookiness, it does detract from creating Ethan as a person. One could surmise that Ethan is supposed to be a character that the player wears the shoes of, but the unfortunate fact is that I would rather not be Ethan. Like many Resident Evil protagonists, he doesn't always have much to say, but unlike the other protagonists, when he does have something to say, it's never with much conviction or anger. In fact, his attitude for most of the game is that of mild annoyance. A key moment where I realized that Ethan is not reacting appropriately to his situation is just after one defeats the most difficult puzzle in the mid-game, the Happy Birthday puzzle. Set up by Lucas, who finds great glee in torturing people with puzzles and games, the birthday puzzle is simultaneously easy to solve and difficult to solve. If you follow the easy path through the room, Ethan dies. You fail. You gotta start again. To solve it, without being a bitch and looking for an online guide, one must have seen a previous hidden playable VHS tape of a separate character, Clancy, participating in the puzzle and dying horribly. Upon seeing a code this character used at a particular door, one can bypass a critical part of the puzzle and basically then bypass the death trap Lucas set. Despite the dire consequences and Ethan surviving the trap, Ethan has only one response once he figures out Lucas escaped just seconds afterwards.
Look, unless you have any more surprises up your sleeve, I suggest you...
Now that would be telling, Ethan. And I don't do spoilers.
Dick.
The games in this series have always been one of camp and self-awareness, but previous games would have every cast member act very seriously about having to negotiate puzzles and solve poetry riddles, as though they were professionally trained in hostile puzzle management, Leon Kennedy especially. All of them were trained in combat, so a cool and collective attitude towards a zombie apocalypse was to be expected, and is mildly humorous. There was a degree of self-aware camp to that, completely not addressing the ludicrous nature to the environment they are in, and taking it at face value. Great fun. Ethan Winters, in his adventure to save his wife, he just seems rather mildly bothered that evil hillbillies, residents, are trying to kill him, evilly. No real conviction in the man, just has the vibe that he's done this before. even though according to his backstory, he has not faced a grindhouse horror beyond human comprehension at any point before the plot of the game. He is just yo average white boy who certainly ain't from around here, are you? His attitude to this is also virtually unchanged in the next game, Village, where he is also just as bothered and annoyed that Eldritch's horrors are out to kill his wife and daughter. None of this either covers Capcom's complete unwillingness to show this man's face, even though he has one. Despite the grievances I have with Ethan as a character, it is only with great jubilation that I have come to tell you, again, that every other character in this game is pretty great, particularly the villains. Resident Evil traditionally has always had cornball type of bad guys. Every villain one met in the prior games justified their evil either due to money, because they were built by scientists to be evil, or because they were literally just evil for the love of the sport. Resident Evil 7 bucks that trend by having sympathetic villains. The Baker household is against Ethan, not because they wanted to be, but because they were mind-controlled into being that way. Mind control, of course, by a bioweapon that happens to look like a little girl. Explained in backstory during the most boring part of the game. During the last boss form of Jack, where he turns into a giant mass of evil goop. Ethan uses one of the serums Zoe made to finally take him down. Only issue is that there were once 2 serums which could cure both Mia and Zoe of the mold virus. If you are not an idiot, you'd pick Mia to save, and thus the 2 of them leave the Baker estate with only Zoe left behind to be a side character in an absurd secondary DLC mission. After escape, Evelyn tips the boat, where the player then gets to see the game through Mia's eyes, exploring this massive shipwreck that you would think someone from the government of Louisiana would have noticed by now. One would also notice that the Evelyn is there as well, but she is not actually there, because she is the one who infects a person with the mold. When she does so, she can appear in their mind, haunting them, forcing them to do heinous acts, like the Hat Man. Goofy-ass explanation. Capcom's desire to have everything explained by evil science goes a little too suspension disbelieving with this one. But she is still kinda spooky, so I'll let it be. It is then revealed on the Love Boat of Misery that 3 years before the game, Mia was working for shady individuals transporting bioweapons. In this case, Evelyn. During a transport one night, Evelyn goes hog wild and absolutely wipes out the whole ship. It then wrecks, causing Evelyn to escape, which is later properly explained in a prequel DLC called Daughters. Taking place on that fateful night the ship wrecked, one can see for a brief moment normalcy in the Baker household. A simple rancher family, certainly not wealthy, but nonetheless honest and hardworking. It was when they rescued the said child-based bioweapon that everything went to shit. Evelyn took control of their minds and forced them to effectively become the cannibals from The Hills Have Eyes, but with southern hospitality. Although this DLC is rather small, it adds the largest impact to how one perceives the Bakers. A playthrough sans the DLC, one sees them as comical monsters. Playing this DLC, one sees them as rather tragic monsters, people consumed by evil outside their control. Nothing groundbreaking by itself, but for a Resident Evil game, rather done. Bravo. After the boat revelations are made, Mia rescues Ethan, and thus he closes out the game in a boring-ass mind filled to the brim with traps laid by Lucas. Upon escape, he arrives in the Baker house one last time to confront Evelyn, who has actually been the mysterious old lady in a wheelchair this whole time, super aged. A short cinematic boss fight ensues, ending with not a rocket launcher, but a special handgun. Then the boulder puncher himself, Chris Redfield, appears, and then the game ends happily ever after. One may notice how I heavily abridge the end portion of this game, and that is because the game starts to fall flat once Ethan leaves the Baker Ranch. The haunted house vibes and aesthetics of the house are simple, so excellent, so well crafted, that suddenly being on a rotten boat and then a mine feels like I'm being ripped from the experience I was originally experiencing. Is that to say the game is truly bad, terrible, unplayable, or any other combination of negative words because the latter half gets kinda iffy? It would be crass of me to say yes, for Resident Evil 2 is in a similar boat. A highly praised game, considered one of the best, but when people think it's the best, they only remember the excellently crafted police station, not the mind-numbingly boring sewer and generical science lab. Neither are necessarily perfect in the maintaining quality of gameplay environments, but as far as maintaining the classic survival horror movie camp and vibe, hell yeah. The level of camp from the main game is even carried over to the DLCs, which, while short, still have a variety of gameplay to make one's time with them feel worthwhile. The free one, called Not a Hero, is a very carefully crafted advertisement for an airsoft shotgun. Playing in the boots of Chris Redfield, but with a less comically chiseled face, Not a Hero takes place directly after the events of the main game. With Evelyn defeated, plus Ethan and Mia safe, Chris ties up loose ends by hunting down Lucas, who is the only character to escape judgment by Ethan and his sourpuss attitude. Taking place entirely in a mine, again, every playthrough with this DLC is always filled with my face being in a neutral state, with the dopamine levels being filled just enough for me to keep being pulled along, but not me excited enough to see what's happening next. The DLC is called Not a Hero, I guess, because Chris unwittingly kills some of his teammates due to traps laid by Lucas. But otherwise, this DLC has Chris Redfield being the ultimate vanilla Japanese white guy he always was. He punches things with gusto, then kills Lucas after he turns into a typical Resident Evil goop monster. I could give you a proper yes or no rating to this DLC, but it's free, it's kinda easy even on the normal difficulty, which I did play on, and it's short, which I like the best. Not a Hero neither adds or removes anything from the story, aside from proving that Capcom still does recognize Chris as being a man who punches things to get his way. The other DLCs, which cost money, are also considerably more interesting. The first is a selection of short vignettes within the banned footage volumes. One is the Daughters DLC that I discussed earlier, but also included is a Mercenaries mode I'll never play. Also included is an escape room type of adventure called Bedroom. Here, one plays as Clancy, a survivor of one of the earlier tapes found in the main game. He is trapped in a bedroom, like most of the Resident Evil player base, except he is actually there unwillingly, and thus he wishes to escape. Only issue is, Marguerite keeps skulking around. Every time one progresses through the room, one always reaches a point where noise is made, and she comes back into the room on a timer. Clancy must then rearrange the room exactly how he originally found it, and get back to bed. Else Marguerite will notice, and have hell rain upon ye. Charming. But what is more charming is the 21 game mode, also involving poor Clancy. Here in this DLC, Lucas is subjecting said character and other captured men to a game of evil blackjack, where one bets with their life instead of all their savings, which in this economy might as well mean the same thing. Certainly, 21 is the first in line of the increasingly popular evil card game genre, also including Inscription and Shotgun Roulette. The twists on regular blackjack here is that there are some goofy modifiers which can be used to screw over your opponent, making 21 a rather playful DLC to get through, even though it is, by nature of a gambling game, sometimes completely up to chance. And this is a bitch to get through. Nonetheless, I enjoyed it, but this is mainly because I do so enjoy me the playing cards. The final DLC for the game, End of Zoe, is also, by far, the most interesting and goofy to talk about. Where the main game of RE7 is a slow burn first-person survival horror, End of Zoe is not. It is a first-person beat-em-up with combos and a cartoony swamp man, the lost member of the Bakers, named Joe. He is here to save the only other surviving member of the Baker family, Zoe, from her turning to ice, which is now a problem for some reason. Knowing no other weapon than his gator-wrestling hands, Joe will punch up all the molded that gave the player so much trouble with the firearms. Goofy stuff here. I love it, although the tone is certainly whiplash compared to the main game. One has no fear playing this DLC, only the fist, and how many abstract molded faces it can meet. One actually defeats Jack Baker again, for the final time, in a big fisticuffs match, as Jack takes on the final form of the Swamp Man. In the end, Joe does save Zoe, and then by extension, the Baker family, or what's left. I had considerably more enjoyment playing this than Not a Hero, simply because Joe is a rather humorous swamp man, killing gators with giant spears and showing no fear for them weird monsters in them there woods. Now, I do wish that the actual true conclusion to the Baker storyline was held with a bit more class than goofy beat-em-up humor, as I think their storyline deserved it. But as a tidy beat-em-up, one cannot complain about the End of Zoe. When looking at Resident Evil 7 as a whole, amongst the other games in the series, this is definitely one of the best. Way better than 5 or 6 at the minimum. Is it actually as good as the OG classics, though? Is it a masterpiece like any other drab schmuck would call a game they like? Well, in my eyes, and thus the correct eyes, a true masterpiece of a video game is one that appeals to both hardcore fans of a genre, as well as accommodating to newcomers. This is the same path of logic that allows me to come to the conclusion that Burnout Paradise, Elden Ring, and Fallout New Vegas are a perfect 10. Those games are engrossing to people familiar with their respective genres, yet is not so drowningly difficult or obtuse that people new to those genres feel lost. Of course, before a game can even be measured by that metric, it must also pass the vibe check of being a good game. What actually defines a good game? Well, to me, a good game is one that causes me to smile at some point during the game, or maybe for prolonged periods, because that means it was doing something right, somewhere, in an unquantifiable way. Resident Evil 7 did make me smile, for its spooky vibes, perfect slasher villain, excellent environment design, and of course the fact that it's short, 5 hours. I love that. More time to play more games. So then, is Resident Evil 7 a masterpiece, a perfect 10? No. While RE7 is an excellent game, I do not think it is worthy of truly being considered a masterpiece. The highs of the first half are incredible, tantalizing, I love it. But the latter half, not so much. Evelyn is also spooky, but the gray walls of the boat are simply no match for the damp wood of the house. And underground mines are always boring no matter what. The game vibe killed itself slightly, but luckily the mechanics of the game were kept up the whole way, enough for me to at least be smiling. The only RE game to really keep up the momentum without losing the plot, or vibe, or sense of badassery is Resident Evil 4. That's a good game. I love Leon. Now, do not mistake me saying the fact that RE7 is not a masterpiece, dissuading one from playing the game, because it is still an excellent game, 9 out of 10. As a whole horror package, from the main game to the DLCs, it is worth one's time. It is a good game. I don't often find myself wanting to replay games, because life is short, and I'd rather play new ones instead. But Resident Evil games are always the ones that make me want to replay them. Something about the easy access horror, short length, and variability in terms of items and enemy placement. It is the same enough to know that I am comfortable playing it during stressful moments, but different enough to where I am always mildly surprised by them. A mark of a good game, but not as good as a game of bingo.